Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. I'm Jack Kearney, a landscape photographer from West Cornwall, Connecticut. Let's go out and make a photo. Canaan, Connecticut is host to the largest waterfall in the state. Here, a striking dichotomy exists. By no mistake, the Appalachian Trail travels this vibrant forest, and even jug handles past the falls. Meanwhile, above the falls sits a hydroelectric dam, which controls the water flow of the Housatonic River and creates energy for Falls Village. Somehow these two diametrically opposed forces work together to define the place. A number of small winding trails come off the AT, seemingly leading to nowhere. Massive boulders rise up under your feet as you wander towards the base of the falls. Wet feet are a strong possibility, and having to climb over and under downed trees is a definite. If you time it right, the plant will be releasing a massive amount of water and the falls will be explosive. There are many foreground options at the base, but they change in enormous ways depending on the water flow. On this day, conditions were dark and stormy. I found a line of small stones that led out to the falls. They created a cascade that drew my attention. I found my composition. This is the shot. Alright, let's talk about my thought process while out in the field. For one, the foreground cascade was really close to the front element of my camera, and I wanted the image in sharp focus from front to back. Two, the falls were moving really fast, so I had to find the right shutter speed for them, but also what I preferred for the river and the cascades. Let's talk about how I accomplished this focus stack and shutter speed blend. In Lightroom, I identified the 4 raw files that I felt were necessary to make the image. 3 of those raw files were at different focal points to capture the full depth of field. The 4th image was a slightly faster shutter speed that I felt captured the energy of the waterfall. By selecting those 4 images and then right-clicking, I chose to edit the images as layers in Photoshop. Once in Photoshop, I named my layers as to not get confused. I selected all 4 layers and then from the edit menu chose to auto-align those layers. Then I deselected my images. I found the 3 layers of different focal points, selected those layers, went up into edit, and chose to auto-blend those layers. This resulted in a focus stack of the 3 layers. I then merged those 3 layers into one single layer. I then moved the faster shutter speed layer under that focus stack. I created a mask on the focus stack, and by using a black paintbrush, painted away the top layer to reveal the faster shutter speed in both the waterfall and the immediate foreground cascades. Now with this work done, we've completed our focus stack and our shutter speed blend, and we can jump back into Lightroom to get into post-processing. First thing I did when back in Lightroom was focus on the crop. With the focus stack, we have some white edges that we need to take care of. And additionally, out in the field, I had framed this image as a 4x5. So I took care of that. Then I moved through the 4 stages of post-processing that I go through with all images: balance, depth, refinement, and color. Okay, let's talk about balance. The image was not very difficult to take as the scene was not very dynamic. I just needed to ensure I wasn't clipping highlights in the waterfall. The first thing I did in terms of balance was to globally lift all of the shadows and blacks to a point where they were no longer clipping. Then with a brush, I painted the foreground rocks, the shadow from the trees in the water, and the deepest shadows in the trees on the left-hand side, and raised up the blacks and shadows there to balance it out with the rest of the frame. Next, I used a brush to paint the waterfalls and bring down the highlights to reveal additional detail and texture. Lastly, I used the select sky to bring back some of the detail that I remember when I was there. By bringing down exposure slightly, highlights, clarity, and dehaze, I was able to bring back some of that cloud texture. Then I brought down a linear gradient tool, intersected with select sky from the top of the frame to darken that down further. When it comes to depth, I identified 4 main layers: the foreground cascades, the river, the trees in the upper left-hand side, and then the background trees and power station. I started by dragging a linear gradient up from the bottom, bringing back clarity and texture to bring that area closer to the viewer. I left the river alone. Then I brought a linear gradient tool down from the top to about the base of the waterfalls. There, I reduced contrast to push that further back. Then with a brush, I selected the power station and the distant trees, brought those back even further by reducing contrast and introducing negative dehaze. Then with select objects, I selected the power station, which is arguably my main subject, and I brought some clarity back to that in order to help it pop. Lastly, I used a brush to paint the base of the falls where atmosphere was being created by the spray. There, I rehazed and brought up the whites slightly to bring out that atmosphere. In terms of refinements, there wasn't much work done here. I selected the waterfall, brought up contrast and clarity to bring out any little bit of detail I could there. Then I jumped into Photoshop and, using the remove tool, cleaned up any little distractions which pulled me out of the journey. Finally, let's talk about color. As I do with many of my images, I introduced some texture and decreased the clarity to create a painterly look. I also increased vibrance slightly, but my main concern was temperature. I wanted to cool down the image to match the dark and stormy conditions we had on that day. But I didn't want to lose the color contrast of the warmth of the rocks in the foreground. So globally, I cooled down the image and then used a brush to bring back the warmth in those rocks. At this point, I felt the sky was getting too blue. So with select sky, I warmed it up and desaturated it. By following my 4 phases of post-processing, I was able to take this image from here to here. Alright, so that's a wrap on this one. Thank you for taking that journey from start to finish with me. If you enjoyed the content today, please like and subscribe. It helps the channel grow and get out to more viewers, and it means a lot to me. I'll see you out there next time.